The words hung in the air like a death sentence, barely audible above the chaos erupting around them. "Kiss me now or I die," Victoria Sterling whispered, her voice fracturing with each ragged breath as blood pooled beneath her on the cold marble floor of Sterling Industries' executive washroom. Her piercing blue eyes, usually sharp enough to cut through boardroom lies and corporate deceptions, now pleaded desperately with the man kneeling beside her, a man she had never truly seen until this moment, when her life balanced on the edge of a knife. Marcus Rivera dropped his cleaning supplies without hesitation, his calloused hands trembling as he pressed them against the gaping wound in her abdomen where the assassin's blade had found its mark just moments before. The same hands that scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans now held the life of Philadelphia's most ruthless billionaire, a woman whose empire had been built on crushing people exactly like him. Blood seeped through his fingers, warm and relentless, as Victoria's breathing grew shallower with each passing second. Her designer suit, worth more than Marcus earned in 6 months, was now soaked crimson, and her perfectly styled hair was matted with sweat and terror. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. "I don't understand," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. He had been cleaning these executive floors for 8 months, invisible to the powerful people who walked these halls, ghosts in gray coveralls who existed only to maintain their pristine world. Victoria Sterling had never spoken a single word to him, had never acknowledged his presence, had never even looked in his direction. And now she was asking him to kiss her, to save her life in a way that defied every logical explanation. "The poison," Victoria gasped, her hand clutching weakly at his shirt, leaving bloody fingerprints on the fabric. "On the blade. It stops my heart in minutes, but my research, my mother's research, the antidote requires direct transfer through saliva exchange. You have the genetic markers, Marcus. You're O-negative blood type, aren't you? You donated blood last month at the company drive." Her words came in fragments, each one a struggle against the toxin coursing through her veins. "I memorized the donor list. Always know your assets. You're my only chance." Marcus stared at her in shock, his mind reeling. How could she possibly know his blood type? How could she know anything about him? He was nobody, a single father who worked nights so he could be home when his daughter Emma got out of school, a man who had fallen from grace so far that mopping floors felt like a blessing rather than a burden. But there was something in Victoria's eyes, beneath the desperation and approaching death, that told him she was speaking the truth. "Please," she whispered, and that single word shattered something inside him. This was Victoria Sterling, the ice queen of corporate America, a woman who destroyed companies before breakfast and fired employees like she was swatting flies. She had never said please to anyone in her entire life. But now, lying broken and bleeding on the bathroom floor, she was just another human being facing mortality, and she was asking him to save her. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Marcus looked down at her face, pale and beautiful even in dying, and made a choice that would change both their lives forever. He leaned down, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was nothing like what he had imagined a first kiss with a billionaire would be like in the impossible fantasy where such a thing might happen. It tasted of copper and fear, of desperation and something else, something electric that passed between them in that moment when death hung in the balance. Victoria's body convulsed once, twice, and then she drew a deep, shuddering breath. Color began to return to her cheeks, slowly at first, then more rapidly. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with an intensity that made Marcus feel suddenly exposed, like she could see straight through to his soul. "It worked," she breathed, wonder and disbelief mingling in her voice. It actually worked. She tried to sit up, but Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, keeping her still. "Don't move," he said softly. "You're still bleeding. We need to get you to a hospital." Victoria shook her head weakly. "No hospitals. Too dangerous. They'll try again. My corporate apartment, there's a medical facility there. 29th floor. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time in her life, allowed vulnerability to show. "Will you help me?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Of course." As he helped her to her feet, supporting her weight against his shoulder, Victoria caught sight of their reflection in the mirror above the sink. They made an unlikely pair, the billionaire CEO in her blood-stained power suit and the janitor in his simple gray coveralls. But something had changed in that moment when his lips touched hers, something that went beyond the transfer of whatever genetic antidote had saved her life. Something had connected them on a level that neither fully understood yet. "Why?" Victoria asked as they made their way slowly toward the private elevator she used to avoid the common areas of her own building. "Why did you help me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Because you asked me to," he said finally. "And because no one deserves to die alone on a bathroom floor, no matter who they are." Victoria Sterling had built her empire by reading people, by understanding their weaknesses and exploiting them for profit. But as she looked at this man who had just saved her life without asking for anything in return, she realized she had no idea how to read him at all. Marcus Rivera was a mystery wrapped in janitor's coveralls, and for the first time in years, Victoria found herself genuinely curious about another human being. The assassination attempt had been planned with surgical precision, the kind of meticulous detail that Victoria herself would have admired under different circumstances. The killer had posed as a new security consultant, complete with forged credentials and a backstory that checked out under the kind of casual scrutiny that most companies employed. He had smiled and shaken hands with Victoria's existing security team, discussed weaknesses in their current protocols, and suggested a private meeting with Ms. Sterling to go over his recommendations. Victoria had agreed to the meeting because she was always looking for ways to tighten security around Sterling Industries. Her corporate empire had been built on aggressive acquisitions and hostile takeovers, and she had accumulated a long list of enemies over the years. Disgruntled former employees, displaced CEOs, entire families whose generational businesses she had dismantled for profit. Any one of them might have hired professional help to settle old scores. The meeting had been scheduled for 7:30 in the evening, after the majority of the building's staff had gone home. Victoria preferred to conduct sensitive business when there were fewer prying eyes and ears around. She'd been reviewing quarterly projections in her office, her attention focused on the numbers that showed Sterling Industries continuing its relentless growth, when her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Sterling, your security consultant is here," Jessica had announced, her voice carrying the same carefully neutral tone she used for all of Victoria's appointments. Victoria had looked up from her laptop, noting the time. 7:28. She appreciated punctuality. "Send him in." The man who entered her office was unremarkable in every way that mattered for his profession. Average height, average build, the kind of face that you would forget 5 minutes after seeing it. He wore a navy blue suit that looked expensive but not ostentatious, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in corporate environments. "Ms. Sterling," he had said, extending his hand with a practiced smile. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I'm David Chen, and I think you'll find my security recommendations quite valuable." Victoria had shaken his hand, noting that his grip was firm without being aggressive. Everything about him seemed calculated to inspire trust while remaining forgettable. She had gestured to the chairs in front of her desk, but he had politely declined. "Actually, I was hoping we could walk through some of the areas I've identified as potential vulnerabilities," he had said. "It's easier to explain the issues when you can see them firsthand." Victoria had agreed, and they had spent the next 20 minutes walking through various parts of the executive floor. Chen had pointed out sight lines that could be exploited, discussed the positioning of security cameras, and made notes about access points that could be better secured. His observations were professional and insightful, and Victoria found herself impressed by his thoroughness. It was when they reached the executive washroom that everything changed. "This is actually one of the most vulnerable areas in the building," Chen had said, gesturing for Victoria to enter the restroom ahead of him. "No security cameras for privacy reasons, multiple exit routes, and it's isolated from the main corridors where someone might hear a struggle." Victoria had stepped into the washroom, and in that moment, she realized that David Chen's security consultation had been nothing more than an elaborate reconnaissance mission. The blade was in his hand and moving toward her abdomen before she could even process what was happening. Years of self-defense training kicked in automatically, and she managed to partially deflect the strike, but the poisoned blade still found its mark. Chen had whispered something about justice for the Morrison family as Victoria stumbled backward, her hand pressed against the spreading warmth in her abdomen. The Morrisons, she remembered them now, a small manufacturing company she had acquired and liquidated 3 years ago. The patriarch had committed suicide rather than face bankruptcy. His son had sworn revenge at the funeral. Chen had left her there to die, confident that the poison on his blade would finish what the wound had started. But he hadn't counted on Victoria's paranoia, her obsession with contingency plans, or the exhaustive research she had conducted into every possible threat against her life. 5 years earlier, Victoria's mother had been a biochemist working for a government contractor, developing antidotes for exotic poisons that might be used against American targets overseas. Before her death in a car accident, she had shared some of her research with Victoria, including information about a rare toxin derived from Central American tree frogs and the genetic markers that provided natural immunity. Victoria had used her resources to identify everyone in her building who possessed those markers just in case. Marcus Rivera had been on that list. The man behind the mop. Marcus Rivera had not always pushed a cleaning cart through the marble corridors of Sterling Industries. 5 years ago, he had been Dr. Marcus Rivera, a respected emergency room physician at Philadelphia General Hospital, saving lives and making a difference in the world. He had owned a beautiful house in the suburbs, drove a BMW, and sent his daughter Emma to private school. His wife Linda had been a successful marketing executive, and together they had built what seemed like a perfect life. The malpractice lawsuit had destroyed all of that in 18 months. The case had involved a 7-year-old boy who had been brought to the emergency room with what appeared to be routine flu symptoms. Marcus had followed standard protocols, but the child's condition had deteriorated rapidly due to an undiagnosed genetic disorder that manifested symptoms identical to common childhood illnesses. Despite Marcus's best efforts, the boy had died, and his grief-stricken parents had filed suit claiming medical negligence. The legal battle had been brutal and public. Marcus's medical decisions were dissected in the press, his competence questioned, his reputation systematically destroyed. Even though he was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, the damage was irreversible. The hospital quietly suggested he might be happier working elsewhere. His medical malpractice insurance premiums became astronomical. Other hospitals were reluctant to hire someone with such public controversy attached to their name. Linda had tried to be supportive at first, but as their financial situation grew desperate and the stress mounted, their marriage began to fracture. She filed for divorce when Emma was 3, citing irreconcilable differences, though Marcus knew the real reason was that she couldn't handle being married to a man whose career and reputation had been ruined. The divorce settlement and legal fees had taken what little savings they had left. Marcus had moved to a small apartment in a rougher part of Philadelphia and taken whatever work he could find. For a while, he had driven for a rideshare company, but the income was unpredictable and the hours conflicted with his custody schedule. He had worked in retail, but the pay was too low to cover even basic expenses. When he saw the posting for a night janitor position at Sterling Industries, the steady hours and decent benefits had seemed like a lifeline. He wasn't proud of mopping floors and cleaning toilets, but it was honest work that let him support his daughter and maintain some shred of dignity. The night shift meant he could pick Emma up from school every day, help with homework, make dinner, and tuck her in before heading to work. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life he had. Emma Rivera was 6 years old and absolutely brilliant. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn streak, combined with an insatiable curiosity about the world around her. She asked questions that most adults couldn't answer, and had a way of cutting straight to the heart of any problem with the kind of clarity that only children possessed. She knew that Daddy had been a doctor before, and that something bad had happened that made him have to find a different job. She didn't understand all the details, but she understood that some people had been mean to him and said he had done something wrong when he was really trying to help a sick little boy. Emma thought that was very unfair, and she had told her father on multiple occasions that when she grew up, she was going to be a lawyer and sue all the mean people who had hurt him. Marcus loved her fierce loyalty, even though he tried to teach her that the world was more complicated than simple categories of good and bad people. He wanted her to understand that sometimes good people made mistakes, and sometimes bad things happened even when everyone was trying their best. But Emma had a 6-year-old sense of justice, and in her world, anyone who hurt her daddy was automatically on the wrong side. The apartment they shared was tiny but clean, with one bedroom that Emma used and a sofa bed in the living room where Marcus slept. The walls were covered with Emma's artwork and school projects, bright splashes of color that made the small space feel warm and lived in. Marcus had sold most of their furniture and nice belongings during the worst of the financial crisis, but he had kept Emma's books and toys, determined that she wouldn't suffer any more than necessary for his mistakes. Every morning, Marcus would make Emma breakfast and walk her to the bus stop, watching until the yellow school bus disappeared around the corner before heading home to sleep. Every afternoon, he would be waiting at the same bus stop when she came home, ready to hear about her day and help with whatever homework challenges awaited them. They would have dinner together, often something simple like spaghetti or grilled cheese sandwiches, and then Marcus would read to her or help her with a puzzle before bedtime. It was a quiet life, far removed from the excitement and prestige of his medical career, but it was theirs. Marcus had learned to find contentment in small moments, Emma's laughter when he told her silly jokes, the proud smile on her face when she solved a difficult math problem, the way she curled up against him when they watched movies together on weekend afternoons. He tried not to think about what might have been, about the life they could have had if he had somehow diagnosed that little boy's condition correctly, if the lawsuit had never happened, if his reputation had remained intact. Regret was a luxury he couldn't afford. Emma needed him to be present and stable, not lost in bitterness about the past. The job at Sterling Industries had been a godsend in practical terms. The pay was enough to cover their rent, groceries, and Emma's basic needs. The health insurance had been a huge relief after months of worrying about what would happen if either of them got sick. The work itself was mindless in a way that Marcus actually found soothing after years of life-and-death medical decisions. He worked the night shift, arriving at Sterling Industries at 11 p.m. and leaving at 7 a.m. The building was mostly empty during those hours, with just a few security guards and the occasional executive working late. Marcus was responsible for cleaning the upper floors, including the executive suites where the real power resided. He had seen Victoria Sterling from a distance a few times, usually when she stayed late to work on some urgent project. She was exactly what he'd expected from reading about her in business magazines. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed, with the kind of cold beauty that seemed designed to intimidate rather than attract. She moved through the building like she owned every atom of it, which of course she did. Marcus had never spoken to her, had never even been in the same room with her until tonight. In the hierarchy of Sterling Industries, he might as well have been invisible. The executives didn't see the cleaning staff as real people. They were just part of the building's infrastructure, like the elevators or the air conditioning system. That invisibility had suited Marcus fine. He wasn't looking for recognition or advancement. He just wanted to do his job, collect his paycheck, and go home to Emma. The last thing he needed was to draw attention to himself or his past. The fewer people who knew that the night janitor had once been Dr. Marcus Rivera, the better. But now, as he helped Victoria Sterling toward her private elevator, her blood seeping through his shirt and her weight heavy against his shoulder, Marcus realized that his invisible existence was about to end. He had saved the life of one of the most powerful women in America, and there was no going back to anonymity after something like that. The private elevator that Victoria used was a technological marvel, equipped with biometric scanners and secure communication systems that connected directly to her penthouse apartment on the building's top floors. As Marcus helped her inside, she pressed her thumb to a scanner that immediately recognized her identity and began ascending to the 29th floor. The ride took less than 2 minutes, but in that confined space, with Victoria leaning heavily against him and the metallic scent of blood filling the air, time seemed to stretch endlessly. Marcus kept his eyes focused on the floor indicator, trying to ignore the way Victoria was studying his face with an intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. "You're not what I expected," Victoria said quietly, her voice still weak from blood loss but carrying a note of curiosity. Marcus didn't look at her. I'm exactly what you should expect from someone who mops your floors. No, Victoria replied firmly. You're something else entirely. The way you handled the emergency situation, your knowledge of medical procedures, the way you speak, you're educated, trained. What are you really? Marcus felt his jaw tighten. This was exactly what he had been trying to avoid for the past 5 years. He didn't want to explain his fall from grace to anyone, especially not to someone like Victoria Sterling, who had probably never failed at anything in her entire life. I'm a janitor, he said, simply. That's all that matters. Victoria was quiet for a moment, and Marcus thought she might drop the subject. But as the elevator slowed, approaching her floor, she spoke again. I know about you, she said softly. Dr. Marcus Rivera, emergency medicine, Philadelphia General Hospital, the malpractice case involving Timothy Morrison, age 7. Marcus's blood ran cold. He jerked away from her, pressing himself against the far wall of the elevator, his eyes wide with shock and something close to panic. How do you know that? He demanded. Victoria met his gaze steadily. I know everything about everyone who works in this building. Background checks, financial records, medical information, legal history. It's not personal. It's just business. I like to know who has access to my company. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the entrance to Victoria's private apartment. But Marcus didn't move. He stood frozen against the elevator wall, staring at her with a mixture of betrayal and fear. Did you know before? He asked. When you asked me to kiss you, did you already know who I was? Yes, Victoria said without hesitation. I knew you were O-negative blood type because I had reviewed the blood drive donor records. I knew you had medical training because of your background, and I knew you were the only person in this building tonight who could save my life. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. For a brief, impossible moment, he had allowed himself to believe that Victoria Sterling had seen him as a human being, that she had trusted him with her life because she recognized something decent in him. But it had all been calculation. Even in her dying moments, she had been using him, manipulating him, based on information she had gathered about his life without his knowledge or consent. So I was just a tool, he said bitterly. A useful piece of equipment you kept information about in case you ever needed it. Victoria struggled to stand upright without his support, one hand pressed against her wounded abdomen. It started that way, she admitted, but it's not that simple anymore. Why? Because I saved your life? Because I followed orders like a good little employee? No, Victoria said, her voice growing stronger despite her physical weakness. Because you chose to help me, even after I told you I had been spying on you. Because you didn't ask for anything in return. Because you looked at me like I was just another person who needed help, not a billionaire who could make or break your life. Marcus wanted to stay angry. Anger was safe, familiar, protective. But there was something in Victoria's voice that made him pause. She wasn't speaking like the ice-cold CEO he had heard about in news interviews. She sounded almost vulnerable. Please, Victoria said, extending her hand toward him, let me get medical attention for this wound. And let me explain. You deserve to know the whole truth. Marcus looked at her outstretched hand, pale and bloodstained, and realized he was at a crossroads. He could walk away right now, go back to his invisible existence, pretend this night had never happened. Or he could step into whatever complicated mess Victoria Sterling represented, knowing that his life would never be simple again. He thought about Emma sleeping safely in their small apartment, trusting that her father would come home in the morning like he always did. He thought about the quiet life they had built together, modest but stable. And then he thought about the way Victoria had said please, a word that probably didn't exist in her usual vocabulary. Marcus reached out and took her hand. Victoria nodded, relief flooding her face as she leaned on him again. All of it, she agreed, but first medical attention. I may have survived the poison, but I'm still bleeding, and I think I'm going into shock. As they made their way into Victoria's private apartment, Marcus caught glimpses of a world he had never imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Philadelphia skyline, artwork that probably cost more than his annual salary, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. But despite all the luxury surrounding them, Victoria Sterling was just another injured person who needed help, and Marcus found himself falling back into the familiar rhythms of medical care that had once defined his identity. Whatever happened next, whatever truths Victoria had to share, and whatever consequences might follow, Marcus knew that his life as an invisible janitor was over. The question now was what would replace it, and whether he would survive the transformation. As Victoria guided him toward what she called her medical suite, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if he was about to discover that saving someone's life could be just as dangerous as letting them die. The collision has begun. Marcus Rivera, a fallen doctor turned invisible janitor, has just saved the life of Victoria Sterling, Philadelphia's most ruthless billionaire CEO, through an impossible kiss that transferred a genetic antidote. But as they retreat to her private world high above the city, Marcus discovers that Victoria knows everything about his ruined past, and nothing between them is as simple as it seems. In Part 2, we'll uncover the full truth behind Victoria's knowledge, explore the world that Marcus has stumbled into, and witness the beginning of a connection that will challenge everything both of them believe about power, trust, and second chances. Victoria's private medical suite looked like something out of a science fiction movie, all gleaming stainless steel and advanced diagnostic equipment that probably cost more than most people's houses. Marcus stood in the doorway, momentarily overwhelmed by the sophistication of the setup, while Victoria made her way to what appeared to be an examination table with integrated monitors. "I know what you're thinking," Victoria said, noticing his expression as she carefully lowered herself onto the table. "It's excessive, but when you've made as many enemies as I have, paranoia becomes a survival skill." Marcus moved toward the supply cabinet, his medical training automatically cataloging what he would need to properly clean and dress her wound. "This isn't paranoia," he said, pulling out sterile gauze and antiseptic. "This is a fully equipped trauma bay. You could perform surgery in here." "We have," Victoria replied quietly. 3 years ago, my head of security took a bullet meant for me. We couldn't risk a hospital because we didn't know who else might be compromised. Dr. Elizabeth Chen performed the surgery right here on this table." Marcus paused, a bottle of saline solution in his hand. "Dr. Chen, she's one of the best trauma surgeons on the East Coast. How did you get her to operate in your apartment?" Victoria's smile was sad and complicated. "She owed me a favor. Her daughter needed experimental cancer treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. I funded the research and paid for the treatment. Lily Chen is now a healthy 12-year-old who wants to be a veterinarian." As Marcus began cleaning Victoria's wound with practiced efficiency, he found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about her. The injury was deeper than he had initially realized, requiring several sutures, but the poison had been fully neutralized by their earlier exchange. His hands moved with the steady precision of someone who had done this countless times before, and Victoria watched him work with growing fascination. "You're still a doctor," she observed. "You can change your job title, but you can't change who you are." "I'm not a doctor anymore," Marcus replied firmly, not looking up from his work. "I'm a janitor who used to be a doctor. There's a difference. What happened to Timothy Morrison was not your fault." Marcus's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their careful work. "You don't know what you're talking about. Reye syndrome secondary to viral infection, masked by atypical presentation due to genetic polymorphism in cytochrome P450 metabolism," Victoria recited from memory. "The autopsy revealed liver damage consistent with a rare metabolic disorder that affects 1 in 50,000 children. There was no way to diagnose it based on his presenting symptoms. 3 other emergency physicians reviewed the case and agreed that your treatment protocols were appropriate." Marcus set down his instruments and finally looked at her, his eyes dark with old pain. "How do you know all of this?" "Because when I was investigating your background, I wanted to understand why a competent emergency physician was working as a janitor in my building. So I had my legal team obtain all the court records, medical files, and expert testimony from your case." "Why?" Marcus demanded. "Why would you go to that trouble for someone you considered just another employee?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "Because I recognized the look of someone whose life was destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. And because I wanted to know if you were dangerous or just broken." And what did you conclude? That you were neither dangerous nor broken. You were punished for being human in a profession that demands perfection. You made the same decision that 99% of emergency physicians would have made with the same information, but you were the unlucky one who ended up in court when the outcome was tragic. Marcus finished suturing her wound and began applying a sterile dressing, his movements more aggressive than necessary. Your investigation doesn't change anything. Timothy Morrison is still dead. His parents still blame me. My career is still ruined. Your career doesn't have to stay ruined. Marcus laughed bitterly. Right. I'm sure the medical board would love to reinstate someone who's been mopping floors for 5 years. Actually, Victoria said carefully, your medical license was never revoked. It's currently listed as inactive, but you could reactivate it with minimal paperwork. I checked. Marcus stopped what he was doing and stared at her. You checked my licensing status? I told you I'm thorough. The question is, do you want your old life back? It doesn't matter what I want. No hospital would hire me after everything that happened. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he had known her, it seemed genuinely warm. I'm not talking about working for someone else. I'm talking about working for me. Marcus finished securing the dressing and stepped back, putting physical distance between them. I don't understand. Sterling Industries has been developing a comprehensive employee health initiative. We're planning to open on-site medical facilities in all our major buildings, providing everything from routine care to emergency treatment for our workforce. We need a medical director for the program, someone with emergency medicine experience who understands what it's like to face impossible situations with limited information. Marcus felt like the floor was shifting beneath his feet. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you your life back. The position comes with a significant salary increase, full medical benefits, and the opportunity to practice medicine again in an environment where you won't be second-guessed by lawyers and insurance companies. This is because I saved your life tonight. No, Victoria said firmly. This is because you're qualified for the position and you deserve a second chance. The fact that you saved my life just gave me the opportunity to make the offer without going through normal hiring channels. Marcus walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that dominated one wall of the medical suite, looking out at the Philadelphia skyline glittering in the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere out there, Emma was sleeping in their small apartment, trusting that her father would be home in a few hours to make breakfast and walk her to the bus stop. I have a daughter, he said quietly. Emma, she's 6 years old. My whole life revolves around making sure she's safe and stable. I can't take risks with her security. Tell me about her. Marcus turned back to Victoria, surprised by the genuine interest in her voice. She's incredible, brilliant, funny, fearless. She wants to be a lawyer so she can sue all the people who were mean to me. He smiled despite everything. She has this way of cutting straight to the truth of things that most adults spend years avoiding. She sounds wonderful. I'd like to meet her. Why? Victoria hesitated, as if she wasn't quite sure how to answer that question. Because she's important to you, and because... She trailed off, then seemed to find her courage. Because I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. Money, access, influence, opportunities. But in the last 2 hours, you've saved my life and asked for nothing in return. That makes you unique in my experience, and it makes me curious about the kind of person who raised you to be that way. Emma didn't raise me. I'm supposed to be raising her. Children teach their parents as much as parents teach their children. What has Emma taught you? Marcus considered the question seriously. That love doesn't have to be complicated. That forgiveness is always possible. That sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is just show up consistently, even when everything else is falling apart. Victoria nodded slowly. Those are valuable lessons. They were interrupted by a soft chime from one of the monitors, indicating that Victoria's vital signs had stabilized completely. The immediate medical crisis was over, but Marcus sensed that the emotional complexity of their situation was just beginning. I should go, he said. Emma will be waking up soon, and I need to be there. Of course. But Marcus... Victoria paused, seeming to struggle with something. Would you consider bringing Emma to dinner tomorrow night, here, in my apartment? I'd like to meet her, and I think it would be good for all of us to talk about what happens next in a more relaxed setting. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. But all he saw was a woman who seemed genuinely lonely, and perhaps a little afraid of that loneliness. "Why do you live alone up here?" he asked. "Someone with your resources, your power. You could have anyone you wanted in your life." Victoria's smile was rueful. "Could I? Most people see dollar signs when they look at me, not a person. The few relationships I've attempted have ended when it became clear that my partners were more interested in my bank account than my personality. It's easier to stay alone than to keep being disappointed by people's motives." That sounds like a lonely way to live. It is, but it's also safe. You can't be betrayed by someone you never trust. Marcus thought about that as he gathered the medical supplies he had used and disposed of them properly. There was something deeply sad about Victoria's admission, a recognition of the walls she had built to protect herself from exactly the kind of pain he had experienced when his own world fell apart. "Emma and I will come to dinner," he said finally. "But I want to be clear about something. If this job offer is some kind of elaborate manipulation, if you're using my daughter's welfare to pressure me into something I'm not comfortable with, I will disappear so fast you'll think I was never here." "I understand. And Marcus, I hope you'll give me the chance to prove that not everyone with money has ulterior motives." As Marcus prepared to leave, Victoria called his name one more time. "The kiss," she said softly. "Earlier, when you saved my life. What was that like for you?" Marcus paused at the door, his back to her. Terrifying, desperate, and he turned to meet her eyes. "Electric, like something passed between us that I don't entirely understand." Victoria nodded. "I felt it too. I've never experienced anything like that before. It was just adrenaline. Life or death situations create artificial intimacy." "Was it?" Victoria asked. "Because I've been in life or death situations before, and I've never felt anything like what happened between us tonight." Marcus didn't have an answer for that, so he simply nodded goodbye and left, taking the elevator down to the main floor where his cleaning cart was still abandoned in the hallway outside the executive washroom. As he gathered his supplies and finished his shift, he tried to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. A few blocks away, Emma Rivera woke up from a dream about flying and padded to the kitchen for a glass of water. She noticed that her father's sofa bed was still folded up, which meant he wasn't home from work yet. This was unusual, but not alarming. Sometimes Daddy had to stay late to finish special projects. She climbed back into her own bed and hugged the stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion since she was 2 years old. Emma had learned not to worry too much when things changed unexpectedly. Life had taught her that sometimes bad things happened, but Daddy always found a way to make things okay again. What Emma didn't know was that her father was currently sitting in his car outside their apartment building, staring up at the windows of their small home and wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life by trusting Victoria Sterling. The job offer was everything he had ever hoped for: a chance to practice medicine again, financial security for Emma, an opportunity to rebuild the career that had been taken from him. But it also meant stepping back into a world where his decisions could have life and death consequences, where one mistake could destroy everything all over again. Was he ready for that responsibility? Was it fair to Emma to risk their quiet, stable life for the possibility of something better? Marcus thought about the way Victoria had looked at him when she said please, the vulnerability in her voice when she talked about being lonely, the electric current that had passed between them during that impossible kiss. There were so many ways this could go wrong, so many reasons to walk away and pretend none of it had ever happened. But there was also Emma, growing up in a tiny apartment with a father who cleaned other people's messes because he was too afraid to take risks. What kind of lesson was that teaching her about resilience and second chances? If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a text message to Victoria. "Dinner tomorrow at 7. Emma likes pizza and asks a lot of questions." Victoria's response came back almost immediately. "Perfect. I'll have the best pizza in Philadelphia delivered, and I love questions." As Marcus finally climbed the stairs to his apartment, he wondered if he was about to give his daughter the gift of watching her father reclaim his dreams, or if he was about to destroy the only stability she had ever known. The next evening, Emma Rivera had never been in an elevator that required a thumbprint to operate, and she found the technology absolutely fascinating. She pressed her small finger to the scanner multiple times, delighted when it beeped and rejected her print, until Marcus gently moved her hand away. "I know, Daddy. But did you see that? It reads fingerprints. How does it know whose finger belongs and whose doesn't? Is there a computer in there? Can I see the computer?" Marcus smiled despite his nervousness. Emma's enthusiasm for understanding how things worked was one of her most endearing qualities, but he hoped Victoria was prepared for the constant stream of questions that accompanied their daughter everywhere. Emma had insisted on wearing her best dress, a blue cotton sundress with small white flowers that Linda had bought for her before their last custody visit. She had also insisted on bringing a present for Victoria, a picture she had drawn during quiet time at school, showing two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "It's you and the pretty lady from work," Emma had explained seriously. "I drew a rainbow because you said she helped you feel happy again." Marcus hadn't corrected her interpretation of events. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that the situation was far more complicated than simple happiness? The elevator opened directly into Victoria's apartment, and Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the soaring ceilings, the wall of windows overlooking the city, and the artwork that seemed to glow under carefully placed spotlights. "Wow," Emma breathed. "It's like a castle in the sky." Victoria appeared from the kitchen area, and Marcus was surprised to see her dressed casually in jeans and a soft gray sweater. She looked younger, less intimidating, more like someone who might actually enjoy spending time with a curious 6-year-old. "You must be Emma," Victoria said, kneeling down to be at eye level with her. "I'm Victoria. Thank you so much for coming to have dinner with me." Emma studied Victoria's face with the intense scrutiny that children brought to new adults. "You're even prettier than in the picture Daddy showed me," she announced, "and you have sad eyes, but nice sad eyes, not mean sad eyes." Victoria blinked, clearly taken aback by Emma's directness. "Thank you. I think that might be the most insightful compliment I've ever received." Emma reached into her small backpack and pulled out the drawing. "I made this for you. It's you and Daddy being friends under a rainbow. Rainbows mean everything's going to be okay." Victoria accepted the drawing with the same reverence she might have shown to a priceless work of art. "Emma, this is beautiful. This is one of the most wonderful gifts anyone has ever given me. May I hang it on my refrigerator?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "That's where the best pictures go. Daddy puts all my school drawings there." As Victoria led them to the kitchen area to display Emma's artwork, Marcus noticed how naturally she interacted with his daughter. There was no condescension, no awkwardness, just genuine interest in what Emma had to say. The pizza, when it arrived, was indeed the best in Philadelphia, from a small family restaurant that didn't normally deliver, but had apparently made an exception for Victoria Sterling. Emma declared it even better than the pizza place near our apartment, and proceeded to eat 3 slices while asking Victoria approximately 47 questions about everything from the height of the building to the art on the walls to whether she had ever met a real princess. "I've met several people who called themselves princesses," Victoria answered diplomatically. "But I think real princesses are probably people like you, Emma. People who are kind and brave and make the world a little bit brighter just by being in it." Emma beamed at this response. "Daddy says I'm his princess, but I told him I want to be a lawyer princess who helps people who need help." "A lawyer princess sounds like an excellent career choice. What kind of people would you want to help?" Emma's expression grew serious. "People like Daddy. People who try to help other people but then get in trouble for things that aren't their fault. I would make sure the mean judges understand that good people sometimes have bad days, but that doesn't make them bad people." Victoria glanced at Marcus, her eyes soft with understanding. "That's a very wise perspective, Emma. I think you're going to be an excellent lawyer princess." After dinner, Emma convinced Victoria to give them a tour of the apartment, marveling at everything from the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves to the art studio that Victoria admitted she rarely used anymore. "Why don't you paint?" Emma asked, running her fingers along the edge of an easel that held a half-finished canvas. "I used to paint when I was younger," Victoria explained, "but as I got busier with work, I stopped making time for it." "That's sad. Daddy says making things with your hands makes your heart happy. Maybe you should try again. Victoria smiled. Maybe I should. When Emma began to yawn despite her best efforts to stay awake, Marcus knew it was time to go. As he gathered their things, Emma threw her arms around Victoria in an impulsive hug. "Thank you for dinner and for being nice to Daddy," Emma whispered. "I hope we can be friends." Victoria hugged her back, and Marcus saw tears gathering in her eyes. "I hope we can be friends too, Emma. Very good friends." After they left, Victoria stood alone in her apartment, looking at Emma's drawing now prominently displayed on her refrigerator. The simple stick figures holding hands under their rainbow seemed to radiate more warmth than all the expensive art in her home combined. For the first time in years, Victoria Sterling went to her art studio and began to paint. Marcus was finishing his shift at Sterling Industries when his phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Emergency board meeting called for this morning. Someone leaked information about the assassination attempt. Can you come in early? I need to talk to you before this gets complicated." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had been dreading exactly this scenario, the moment when their private arrangement became public knowledge and his past became fodder for corporate gossip and media speculation. He found Victoria in her office, surrounded by newspapers and printouts of online articles. The headlines were sensational and predictable. Billionaire CEO attacked in office building, Sterling Industries security breach raises questions, and worst of all, mysterious janitor saves CEO's life in dramatic rescue. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked. Victoria looked up from the papers, her face grim. "Bad. Someone with access to security footage leaked an edited version that makes it look like we were having some kind of romantic encounter in the bathroom. The board is furious. The stock price dropped 12% in pre-market trading, and there are reporters camped outside the building demanding interviews." Marcus sank into a chair, his worst fears materializing before his eyes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Emma's going to see this. Her school, the other parents, they're all going to know." "Marcus, listen to me," Victoria said urgently. "I have a plan to handle this, but I need you to trust me completely. Are you willing to do that?" Marcus looked at her across the desk, this woman who had turned his quiet life upside down in a matter of days. 3 nights ago, she'd been a stranger whose floors he mopped. Now she was asking for his complete trust while his life exploded in newspaper headlines. "What kind of plan?" Victoria's smile was sharp and determined, the expression of someone who had built an empire by outmaneuvering her enemies. "We're going to tell them the truth," she said. "All of it. Your medical background, the assassination attempt, the real reason you were able to save my life. And then we're going to announce your new position as medical director in a way that makes it clear this was always about your qualifications, not about any personal relationship. And if they don't believe it, if they think this is all some elaborate cover story?" Victoria stood and moved to the windows overlooking the city where Marcus had once been invisible and was now about to become very, very visible. "Then we proved them wrong," she said. "Together." Marcus thought about Emma's drawing on Victoria's refrigerator, about the way she had hugged this powerful stranger and declared them friends, about the rainbow that promised everything would be okay. "All right," he said, "let's tell them the truth." Victoria nodded, already reaching for her phone to call the head of PR. "Emergency press conference in 2 hours, and Marcus." "Yeah? Whatever happens next, you won't face it alone." As Marcus left her office to prepare for the most public moment of his life since his medical career imploded, he realized that somewhere in the last few days, he had stopped thinking of Victoria Sterling as a billionaire who had briefly needed his help. She had become something much more dangerous and much more precious. She had become someone he cared about, and he was pretty sure she cared about him too. The Sterling Industries conference room had never felt smaller. Marcus stood beside Victoria at the head of the massive oak table, facing a semicircle of board members whose expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. The emergency meeting had been called for 9 a.m., but the tension in the room suggested this confrontation had been building for much longer than the 3 days since news of the assassination attempt had leaked. Victoria wore her armor well, a charcoal gray power suit that cost more than most people's cars, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. But Marcus could see the subtle signs of stress in the way she gripped her pen and the barely perceptible tremor in her left hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice carrying the authority that had built a billion-dollar empire. "I've called this meeting to address the rumors and speculation surrounding recent events and to introduce you formally to Dr. Marcus Rivera, our new medical director for employee health services." Richard Blackwood, the silver-haired chairman of the board, leaned forward with the predatory smile of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. "Ms. Sterling, with all due respect, the optics of this situation are catastrophic. Our stock price has dropped 15% since news broke of your encounter with a janitor. Our shareholders are demanding answers." "And they'll have them," Victoria replied smoothly. "Dr. Rivera saved my life 3 nights ago when I was attacked by an assassin posing as a security consultant. His quick thinking and medical expertise prevented what could have been a fatal poisoning." Board member Patricia Chen, a former pharmaceutical executive, spoke up with barely contained disdain. "Medical expertise? Our records show Mr. Rivera has been employed as custodial staff for 8 months. Are you seriously suggesting that a janitor diagnosed and treated a sophisticated poisoning attempt?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but Victoria placed a subtle hand on his arm, a gesture that somehow conveyed both support and a request for patience. "Dr. Rivera," Victoria said, emphasis on his title, "is a board-certified emergency medicine physician with 12 years of trauma experience. His employment in custodial services was a personal choice following circumstances that I'm sure you'll all research thoroughly after this meeting. What matters is that his medical knowledge and rapid response saved my life." "How convenient," Blackwood sneered. "A disgraced doctor working as your janitor just happened to have the exact skills needed when you were allegedly attacked. And now, coincidentally, you're rewarding him with a medical director position. Do you really expect us to believe this isn't some elaborate scheme to cover up an inappropriate relationship?" The room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's heart pounding in his ears. This was exactly what he had feared, his past being weaponized, his reputation becoming collateral damage in corporate warfare. He started to stand, ready to leave and spare Victoria further embarrassment, but her hand on his arm tightened. "Mr. Blackwood," Victoria said, her voice dropping to the dangerous whisper that every Sterling Industries employee recognized as the calm before the storm. "I'm going to assume that your choice of words reflects stress rather than deliberate disrespect for a man who risked his own safety to preserve my life, and by extension, this company's leadership stability." "Victoria," board member Janet Mills interjected, "we're not questioning Dr. Rivera's heroism. We're questioning your judgment. The media is already painting this as a billionaire's romantic fantasy come to life. How do we explain to shareholders that our CEO is making major personnel decisions based on personal gratitude rather than business needs?" Marcus couldn't stay silent any longer. "May I respond to that?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Victoria nodded, and Marcus stood facing the table of powerful strangers who held his future in their hands. "5 years ago," he began, "I lost my medical career because I made the same diagnostic decision that 99% of emergency physicians would have made with the same information. A child died despite my best efforts, and his family sued me. The case was eventually dismissed, but the damage to my reputation was irreversible." He paused, looking each board member in the eye. "I took the custodial position at Sterling Industries because it offered steady income and benefits while I focused on raising my 6-year-old daughter. I didn't know who Victoria Sterling was beyond her name on my paycheck. When I found her bleeding on the bathroom floor 3 nights ago, I didn't see a billionaire or a career opportunity. I saw a human being who was dying, and I used every skill I possessed to keep her alive." Patricia Chen leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. "Dr. Rivera, what specifically made you qualified to treat an exotic poisoning?" "I wasn't treating the poisoning," Marcus explained. "I was treating massive blood loss from a stab wound and impending cardiac arrest. The antidote transfer that Ms. Sterling described was her idea, based on research I had no knowledge of. My role was basic trauma care, stopping bleeding, maintaining airway, preventing shock. Yet you agreed to her request for what she describes as saliva exchange, Blackwood said, the phrase dripping with innuendo. Marcus felt his temper flare, but when he spoke, his voice remained level. Mr. Blackwood, I've performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on dozens of patients over my career. Gender, age, social status, none of that matters when someone stops breathing. When a dying person tells you that a specific action might save their life, you don't pause to consider the optics. You act. And the job offer? Janet Mills asked. Surely you can understand why we're concerned about the timing. Victoria stood, her presence commanding the room. The job offer exists because Sterling Industries has been developing a comprehensive employee health program for 18 months. We've been searching for a medical director with emergency medicine background and experience dealing with high-stress situations. Dr. Rivera's qualifications make him an ideal candidate. Qualifications that include 5 years of unemployment in his field, Blackwood pointed out. Qualifications that include maintaining his medical license, continuing education requirements, and first-hand knowledge of what it's like to have your career destroyed by circumstances beyond your control, Victoria shot back. Our employees deserve medical care from someone who understands that people are more than their worst moments. The room erupted in murmured conversations as board members conferred with each other. Marcus watched the political maneuvering and felt a familiar sense of helplessness, his fate. Being decided by people who saw him as a problem to be managed rather than a person with value. That's when Emma's voice echoed in his memory. Good people sometimes have bad days, but that doesn't make them bad people. Marcus stood again, this time with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally remembered his own worth. I want to address something that hasn't been discussed yet, he said, his voice cutting through the chatter. You're all focused on whether I'm qualified for this position, whether Ms. Sterling's offer is appropriate, whether our professional relationship might become personal. But you're missing the fundamental point. He turned to face Victoria, whose eyes widened slightly at his shift in tone. 3 days ago, someone tried to murder your CEO in this building. They got past your security, accessed the executive floor, and came within minutes of succeeding. The only reason Victoria Sterling is alive today is because a disgraced doctor working as a janitor happened to be in the right place with the right skills. Marcus turned back to the board. So before you decide whether I'm qualified to run an employee health program, maybe you should ask yourselves why your current security and medical protocols failed so completely that you needed a custodial worker to save your CEO's life. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at Marcus with something that looked like pride, while the board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. Patricia Chen was the first to speak. That's actually a fair point. Richard, what do we know about the security failure? Blackwood's face had gone red. That's not what we're here to discuss. Isn't it? Victoria asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Because it seems to me that you're all more concerned with the optics of my relationship with Dr. Rivera than you are with the fact that someone got close enough to kill me in my own building. Makes me wonder about your priorities. Janet Mills cleared her throat. Victoria, we're concerned about both issues, but the media attention around Dr. Rivera is immediate and damaging. We need to control that narrative. The narrative, Marcus said slowly, is that a trained emergency physician saved a life using his medical skills. If the media wants to sensationalize that, it says more about them than it does about us. But surely you can see how this looks, Patricia Chen argued. A billionaire and her employee, a dramatic rescue, a romantic-sounding backstory about genetic compatibility and life-saving kisses. It looks, Victoria interrupted, like I'm alive because I hired competent people and one of them happened to have the exact skills needed in a crisis. It looks like Sterling Industries values substance over credentials and gives people second chances when they deserve them. Blackwood leaned forward aggressively. Victoria, I think you're letting gratitude cloud your business. Judgment. This man has been a janitor for 8 months. How do we know he can handle the responsibility of a medical directorship? Marcus had heard enough. Mr. Blackwood, with respect, I've been keeping people alive under pressure for longer than some of your board members have been in their positions. I've made life and death decisions with incomplete information, worked 36-hour shifts without a break, and managed trauma cases that would give most people nightmares. If you think emptying trash cans for 8 months somehow erased 12 years of medical training, then you don't understand either medicine or competence. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength, I've spent the last 5 years learning what it's like to be invisible in corporate America, to be treated as disposable, to have my worth measured by my job title instead of my character. That experience didn't make me less qualified to run a health program. It made me more qualified to understand the employees that program is designed to serve. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since entering the conference room, it reached her eyes. Which brings us to the real question facing this board, she said. Are we the kind of company that writes people off after their worst moment, or are we the kind that recognizes potential and gives second chances? The board members exchanged glances, and Marcus could see the political calculations happening in real time. Patricia Chen spoke first. Dr. Rivera, assuming we approve this appointment, what would be your first priority as medical director? Marcus didn't hesitate. Comprehensive trauma training for all security personnel, improved emergency medical supplies on every floor, and protocols for handling medical emergencies that don't rely on hoping someone with the right skills happens to be nearby. Janet Mills nodded slowly. Those sound like reasonable priorities. Victoria, what's the proposed salary for this position? $200,000 annually, plus full benefits and medical malpractice insurance coverage. Blackwood's eyebrows shot up. That's more than most of our senior VPs. Dr. Rivera will be responsible for the health and safety of 12,000 employees across 6 facilities, Victoria replied. I consider that worth investing in properly. The board spent another hour grilling both Victoria and Marcus about everything from the medical program's budget to Marcus's plans for continuing education. By the time they called for a vote, Marcus felt like he had been through a medical board examination, a job interview, and a criminal trial all at once. The vote was closer than Victoria would have liked, 5 in favor, 3 opposed, with 1 abstention. But it was enough. As the board members filed out, Blackwood paused at the door. Victoria, I hope you know what you're doing. This decision could define your legacy as CEO. Victoria met his gaze steadily. I'm sure it will. Richard, I'm counting on it. 2 weeks later, the Sterling Industries medical facility on the 15th floor was nothing like the sterile, impersonal emergency room where Marcus had once worked. The space was designed to feel welcoming rather than institutional, with warm lighting, comfortable seating, and large windows that let in natural light. But the medical equipment was state-of-the-art, and the protocols Marcus had developed were thorough and professional. Emma visited after school on the day of the facility's official opening, her eyes wide as Marcus showed her around his new domain. This is where you help people now? She asked, touching the examination table with reverent fingers. This is where I help people again, Marcus corrected gently. Just like I used to, but different. Emma nodded seriously. Better different or scary different? Marcus considered the question. Better different, I think. I get to know the people I'm helping. They're not strangers having the worst day of their lives. They're co-workers and friends who need care. And you like your new boss lady? Marcus smiled. Victoria had become a regular presence in their lives over the past 2 weeks, joining them for dinner twice and helping Emma with a science project that had somehow turned into a complex engineering challenge involving magnets and rubber bands. I like her very much, Marcus said. She's teaching me that not all successful people are mean, and I think I'm teaching her that not all families have to be perfect to be happy. Emma processed this with the gravity that she brought to all important information. Is she going to be my new mom? The question caught Marcus off guard, even though he had been wondering the same thing himself. His relationship with Victoria had deepened beyond professional respect, beyond gratitude, into something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Would you want her to be? He asked carefully. Emma shrugged. I never had a mom I could remember, so I don't know what it's supposed to feel like. But she looks at me like I'm interesting instead of just small, and she looks at you like you're the most important person in the room. That seems like mom feelings to me." Marcus hugged his daughter, marveling once again at her ability to cut straight to the heart of complex emotions. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" "I know," Emma said with 6-year-old confidence. "Are you going to marry her?" Before Marcus could figure out how to answer that question, Victoria appeared in the doorway of the medical facility, carrying coffee for Marcus and hot chocolate for Emma. "How's the tour going?" she asked, handing Emma her drink. "Daddy has the best doctor office ever," Emma announced, "and he says you're teaching him that successful people aren't all mean. Are you going to marry him?" Victoria nearly choked on her coffee, while Marcus felt his face turn red. "Emma, you can't just ask people things like that." "Why not? It's the important question. If you're going to be a family, you should know about it." Victoria knelt down to Emma's eye level, her expression thoughtful. "Emma, your daddy and I care about each other very much. We're still figuring out exactly what that means, but whatever happens, you'll always be the most important person in his life. And you'll always be important to me too." Emma studied Victoria's face with the intensity she usually reserved for broken electronics. "Okay," she said finally, "but if you decide to get married, I want to help plan the wedding, and I want a really big rainbow cake." Victoria laughed, the sound bright and genuine in a way that still surprised Marcus every time he heard it. "If we ever have a wedding, you'll be the first person we ask to help plan it, and a rainbow cake sounds perfect." As they left the medical facility together, Marcus realized that his life had become something he never could have imagined 6 months ago. He was practicing medicine again, helping people who needed care. He had a relationship with a woman who challenged him intellectually and supported his dreams for the future. Emma was thriving in a private school that Victoria had insisted on paying for, surrounded by opportunities Marcus never could have provided alone. But more than any of the external changes, Marcus felt like himself again. Not the broken, bitter man who had hidden behind a mop for 5 years, and not the arrogant young doctor who had thought he could save everyone. He was someone new, wiser, more humble, but also more confident in his own worth. "Thank you," he said to Victoria as they walked toward the elevator. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I was worth saving." Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes soft with emotion. "Marcus, you were never invisible. You were just in the wrong light. And you didn't need saving. You needed someone to remind you who you already were." She reached up and touched his face gently. "Besides, I think we saved each other." Marcus leaned down and kissed her, and this time there was nothing desperate or life-threatening about it. It was just two people who had found something precious in each other, something worth protecting and nurturing and celebrating. When they broke apart, Emma was grinning at them from beside the elevator doors. "That looked like a 'yes, we're going to get married' kiss," she announced with satisfaction. Marcus and Victoria looked at each other and started laughing, the sound echoing through the hallway of Sterling Industries, where a janitor had once been invisible and was now home. The wedding was small and perfect, held in the art studio of Victoria's penthouse with just a few close friends and family members in attendance. Emma served as both flower girl and wedding planner, ensuring that every detail met her exacting standards. The cake was indeed rainbow-colored with 7 layers, representing all the colors of Emma's original drawing that still hung on Victoria's refrigerator. Marcus wore his father's watch and a new suit that actually fit him properly. Victoria wore her grandmother's pearls and a simple white dress that made her look radiant rather than intimidating. But the most beautiful thing in the room was Emma, resplendent in a blue dress with flowers in her hair, beaming as she watched her father marry her chosen mother. During the ceremony, Victoria promised to love Marcus not despite his past, but because of everything he had learned from it. Marcus promised to love Victoria not despite her success, but because of the generous heart she had learned to show him. And Emma, when asked if she had anything to add during the exchange of vows, stepped forward with the microphone and said, "I just want to say that sometimes the worst things that happen to people can turn into the best things if they're brave enough to let other people help them. And also, I'm really happy that I'm going to have both a daddy and a mommy now, because that means twice as many people to help me with my homework." The laughter that followed was warm and joyful, the sound of a family that had been broken and reassembled into something stronger than any of its individual pieces. As they danced to their first song as a married couple, Marcus and Victoria held each other close, remembering the night when a desperate whisper had changed everything. "Kiss me now, or I die." They had both been dying in different ways, Marcus from shame and regret, Victoria from loneliness and isolation. The kiss that had saved Victoria's life had also breathed new life into both of their souls. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been working that night?" Marcus asked as they swayed to the music. Victoria smiled and pulled him closer. "I don't wonder about it," she said, "because I know. You would have found some other way to save me, and I would have found some other way to save you. Some things are just meant to be." Emma, dancing nearby with Victoria's assistant Jessica, called out, "Are you talking about destiny? Because destiny is when the universe makes sure the right people find each other." Marcus and Victoria looked at their daughter, because Emma was truly their daughter now, belonging to both of them completely, and realized she was absolutely right. Sometimes the universe did make sure the right people found each other. Sometimes it took a whispered plea in a moment of desperation, a kiss that transferred more than antidotes, and a little girl's wisdom about rainbows, meaning everything would be okay. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it all led to a love story that no one could have imagined but everyone could believe in. Epilogue. 5 years after their wedding, Marcus Rivera Sterling stood in the main lobby of the Sterling Medical Foundation, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on what would become the largest free clinic in Philadelphia. The foundation had grown from Victoria's employee health program into a comprehensive medical outreach initiative serving the entire city. Emma, now 11 and every bit as brilliant as her parents had always known she would be, served as the unofficial tour guide for visiting donors and medical students. She had memorized every statistic about healthcare access, every story of lives changed by the foundation's work, and every detail of her father's journey from disgrace to redemption. "The best part," Emma was telling a group of medical students that afternoon, "is that everyone who works here understands that people are more than their worst moments. My dad teaches that to all the new doctors, and my mom makes sure the foundation has enough money to help anyone who needs it." Victoria appeared at Marcus's elbow, slipping her hand into his as they watched their daughter hold court with young people who hung on her every word. "She's going to run this place someday," Victoria said with pride. "She's going to run everything someday," Marcus corrected. "President Rivera Sterling has a nice ring to it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the final preparations for the clinic's opening ceremony. Tomorrow, hundreds of people would walk through these doors, seeking medical care they couldn't afford elsewhere. They would be treated with dignity and respect by doctors who understood that healing required more than just medical expertise. "Do you miss it sometimes?" Victoria asked, "the adrenaline of emergency medicine?" Marcus considered the question. "I miss helping people in crisis," he said. "But this is helping people before they reach crisis, prevention instead of reaction, building something that lasts instead of just stopping the bleeding." "And the kiss that started it all?" Victoria asked, smiling at their old private joke. "Any regrets about agreeing to that desperate request?" Marcus turned to his wife, this remarkable woman who had seen potential in a broken man and loved him back to wholeness, and kissed her softly in the middle of their medical foundation lobby. "Best kiss of my life," he said, "and the first kiss of the rest of my life." Emma's voice carried across the lobby. "And that's how my parents prove every day that love really can save your life, not just once, but over and over again." The medical students applauded, and Marcus and Victoria laughed, holding each other close in the building they had created together, a monument to second chances, to the power of seeing people clearly, and to the truth that sometimes the most unlikely love stories turn out to be the most real. Outside, Philadelphia sparkled in the afternoon sun, full of people who would soon discover that they were not invisible, not forgotten, not beyond help. Inside, a family that had been built from broken pieces continued to prove that some kisses really could save lives, and some love stories really could change the world. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.